For generations, the aircraft carrier has been the ultimate symbol of American military hegemony, a floating city of steel, crewed by 5,000 souls, projecting power across 700 miles of ocean. It is the centerpiece of diplomacy, the first tool of crisis, and the last argument of kings. But in the narrow, heated waters of the Persian Gulf, a new reality is being forged in secret workshops and desert launch sites. Iran, understanding it could never match the U.S. Navy ship for ship, has pursued a different path. It has built not a navy to challenge the open seas, but a labyrinthine killbox to dominate its own doorstep. And at the heart of this strategy lies a vast, sophisticated, and constantly evolving fleet of land-based cruise missiles. This isn't about winning a traditional war, it's about rendering the U.S. Navy's greatest asset a potential liability. This is the story of asymmetric warfare in its most advanced form, a deadly game of chess played with supersonic pieces. Where the recent killings of commanders, the strikes on tankers, and the whispers of war all lead to one terrifying question. What happens when the world's most powerful military meets a foe that has spent 40 years designing a single, devastating trap? The geography itself is Iran's first and greatest ally. The Persian Gulf is not the Pacific Ocean. It is a bathtub, a shallow, confined body of water, barely 200 miles wide at its broadest point. The Strait of Hormuz, the artery of global energy, is a mere 21 miles wide. For a U.S. carrier strike group to meaningfully project power onto Iran, it must enter this bathtub. And in doing so, it sails into a web of sensors and launchers. So dense it constitutes what Pentagon war planners term an anti-access, area denial bubble, an A2, AD network. Iran's entire military doctrine in the Gulf is predicated on this simple, brutal fact. We know where you have to be, and we have spent decades placing 1,000 gunsights on that spot. The recent escalation, the U.S. strikes on IRGC positions in Syria and Iraq. The Iranian retaliation against U.S. bases, the shadow war of drones and proxies, isn't background noise. It is the stress test. Each incident provides data, reveals response patterns, and refines the target package. The cruise missiles we are about to examine are not static weapons in silos. They're the dynamic, intelligent apex of this decades-long experiment in how a regional power can defy a superpower. Let's name them, these digital age privateers. First, the strategic enablers, the Sumar and Havaitsa families. These are Iran's land attack cruise missiles, descendants of the Soviet Kh-55, with ranges stretching beyond 2,000 kilometers. Their primary target is not the ship, but the ship's world. Imagine the moment of crisis. From deep within Iranian territory, these stealthy, terrain-hugging missiles, guided by onboard computers that match hills and valleys to digital maps, would streak towards the airbases in Qatar, the headquarters in Bahrain, the ports in Saudi Arabia that host U.S. logistics, fuel, and command. Their job is to blind and cripple the support structure, to isolate the carrier strike group before the first anti-ship missile is even fired. They turn the U.S. Navy's vast regional infrastructure from an advantage into a vulnerability, a list of fixed coordinates waiting for a payload. Then come the hunters, the true carrier killers. The Ghadar, the Noor. These are Iran's anti-ship cruise missiles, often based on the Chinese C-802. With ranges from 120 to over 300 kilometers, they are the scalpel to the Sumar's hammer. But Iran does not plan to use a scalpel. It plans to use a hailstorm. Doctrine calls for saturation attack. Picture not one or two missiles, but simultaneous salvos of dozens, even hundreds, launched from a chaotic mosaic of platforms. Truck-mounted launchers scurrying down coastal highways, hidden in palm groves 1 minute and firing the next, fixed batteries carved into mountainsides. Even commercial container ships potentially modified as stealthy launch platforms. The goal is pure mathematics: to overwhelm the legendary Aegis combat system defending the carrier. A U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is a marvel, its radar and interceptors capable of tracking and engaging hundreds of targets. But it only has 96 missile cells in its vertical launch system. Those cells must hold everything: surface-to-air missiles, land attack missiles, anti-submarine rockets. In a wave attack, the destroyer can run dry. And then come the leakers. And a single 165-kilogram high-explosive warhead impacting the flight deck, the island, or the hull can achieve a mission kill, crippling the carrier's ability to launch aircraft, rendering it a burning, drifting liability. A symbol of power turned into a symbol of vulnerability. But the missile itself is only the bullet. The genius, and the horror, of Iran's system is the kill chain, the seamless process of find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess. This is where Iran has made a quantum leap. Finding a carrier in the vast ocean is hard. Finding it in the Gulf is easier, but tracking it with precision for a missile strike is the critical challenge. This is where Iran's drone fleet enters, not as weapons themselves, but as the unblinking eyes of the fleet. Long-endurance UAVs like the Shahed 129 and the Mohajer 6 can loiter on station for over 24 hours. They provide persistent, real-time surveillance. This is the game changer. In the past, a cruiser might get a radar track, launch a missile, and hope the target doesn't move too much before impact. Now, an Iranian drone can hover over the horizon, digitally painting the moving carrier, and transmit continuous targeting data via data link to the incoming cruise missiles mid-flight. It turns a dumb rocket into a smart weapon with constant course correction. This network extends to over-the-horizon radars that provide initial cueing, and to thousands of IRGC Navy fast attack boats and even civilian dhows, creating a human sensor web across the Gulf that is impossible to fully clear. To break Iran's kill chain, the US must not only shoot down missiles, but it must also blind this network of eyes. A task requiring massive, preemptive strikes deep into Iranian territory, an act of war that would itself be the very trigger for the apocalypse Iran promises. And the arsenal is not static. Every military parade unveils a new name, a new claimed capability, designed as much for psychological impact as for battlefield effect. The Martyr Soleimani and Abu Mahdi missiles, named for the commanders killed by the US, are touted with ranges of 1,000 kilometers plus, a direct message written in rocket fuel. Then there is the specter of the hypersonic Fata. While serious questions remain about its operational readiness, the mere claim sends a shiver through naval planning. A hypersonic missile, traveling at Mach 5 or above and capable of maneuvering, would compress the carrier group's decision loop from minutes to seconds. The defensive gauntlet of Aegis, SM-6 interceptors, and close-in weapons systems would be tested in a way never before seen in combat. Even if the reality lags the rhetoric, the relentless innovation signals an opponent that is learning, adapting, and investing in the single mission of making the Gulf a no-go zone. So, what is the US counterplay? It is formidable. It is a layered shield of technology and training that represents the peak of conventional military power. The first line of defense is the F/A-18 Super Hornet. And now the F-35C on combat air patrol, hunting the launch trucks and drones before they can fire. Then comes the Aegis screen, a dome of radar and interceptors that is the best in the world. Finally, the last-ditch defenses, the rapid-fire Phalanx CIWS and rolling airframe missiles that create a wall of steel and explosives in the final seconds. The US Navy drills for this scenario relentlessly. But their greatest vulnerability is not technology, but logistics. It is the magazine depth we mentioned. In a war of attrition at the very start of a conflict, there is no time to sail to a friendly port and rearm. When the missiles run out, the shield fails. Furthermore, the US reliance on a small number of supremely capable, supremely expensive platforms creates a risk concentration. The loss of even one destroyer in such an attack would be a national trauma. The mission killing of a carrier would be an event of historical magnitude. This brings us to the grim calculus of consequences, the reason why this detailed military scenario matters to every person watching. Iran preparing its cruise missiles is not necessarily a prelude to an attack. It is, above all, an exercise in deterrence. The goal is to make the cost of US military action so prohibitively high, so viscerally terrifying to planners in the Pentagon and politicians in Washington, that the carrier is effectively neutralized as a tool of coercion. It is a strategy of deterrence by punishment. Sinking a carrier is an existential act. The US response would not be proportional, it would be catastrophic. It would likely involve not just a retaliatory strike, but a comprehensive campaign to dismantle the Iranian state, its military, and its nuclear program. The Strait of Hormuz would close. Global oil prices would not spike. They would rocket into the stratosphere, triggering an instantaneous worldwide economic depression. The regional conflict would engulf Israel, Saudi Arabia, and draw in global powers. The food and supply chain crises would be unimaginable. This is the unthinkable outcome that the dance of deterrence is meant to avoid. So, when you see the headlines about Iran's missile exercises or a U.S. carrier group transits the strait, understand you are witnessing a high-resolution snapshot of a permanent, silent confrontation. It is a battle of wills measured in engineering tolerances, satellite passes, and radar frequencies. The Iranian cruise missile strategy is a masterclass in how a weaker power can leverage geography, ingenuity, and the relentless focus on a single problem to change the rules of the game. It ensures that any decision to send a carrier into harm's way is not taken lightly, but with the full, grave understanding of what waits over the horizon. The Persian Gulf, therefore, is more than a body of water.